September 7, 1940. The first bombs of the Blitz scream over London, shaking the city to its ancient foundations. Fire rages along the Thames, and the roar of falling masonry drowns out the cries of the wounded. Amid the chaos, the Tower of London, centuries-old fortress and royal archive, stands defiantly, but fragile. Inside its cold stone walls, a quieter, unexpected guardianship stirs. 6 black-feathered ravens, each tethered to history, their wings catching the smoke-filled light. Rumors whisper that if the ravens ever leave, the crown and the city will fall. Tonight, as air raid sirens wail and incendiary bombs strike just a mile away, these birds may be London's last line of defense. Yet no one knows how or why they will act. Long before the Blitz darkened London's skies, the Tower of London had already earned its place in legend. Built by William the Conqueror nearly 1,000 years ago, it had been a fortress, a royal palace, a prison, and a treasury. Generations of monarchs had walked its cold stone corridors, and centuries of history were stored in its walls. But as the Second World War loomed over Britain, the tower faced a threat unlike any before. Modern warfare, indiscriminate bombing, and the possibility of losing the very symbol of England itself. By the summer of 1940, Hitler's Luftwaffe had begun relentless aerial assaults on British cities. London, with its dense population and historical treasures, was a prime target. The government, the military, and even the citizens were consumed by plans for evacuation, fire prevention, and air raid shelters. But hidden amid the tower's ramparts was a peculiar challenge that concerned not soldiers or engineers, but birds. Ravens had lived at the tower for centuries, more myth than official guardians. According to legend, if the ravens ever abandoned the fortress, the crown and the kingdom would fall. By 1940, there were 6 ravens, each with a name, each tethered to a keeper who ensured they remained close to their ancient home. Their presence seemed ceremonial, almost quaint, but as the Luftwaffe prepared its assault, it became clear these birds would play a role no one had anticipated. At the time, many dismissed the ravens as symbolic, amusing curiosities in a grim wartime reality. Yet the tower was no ordinary target. Inside its walls rested priceless records, centuries of royal documents and weapons of state. A direct hit could erase centuries of history and disrupt Britain's morale at the very moment it needed unity. Preserving the tower became more than a matter of architecture. It was about protecting the heart of the nation. Air raid precautions were in place, but London's defenses were stretched thin. Anti-aircraft batteries littered the skyline, searchlights swept the clouds, and thousands of civilians manned fire-watching posts. Meanwhile, deep inside the fortress, the tower's custodians observed another kind of protection: the behavior of the ravens. Their instincts, honed over centuries of coexistence with humans, suddenly assumed an eerie significance. Keepers noted the birds became unusually restless on nights when air raids were expected. They would caw sharply, pace in their cages, and sometimes flutter against their tethers as if sensing danger long before it arrived. Military planners, preoccupied with bombs and navigation, could hardly have imagined the tower's oldest residents would contribute to its defense. Yet the intersection of superstition, instinct, and wartime vigilance created a unique situation. The tower's ravens were not just silent witnesses to history, they were active participants in a tense and unpredictable drama. Each movement, each caw, became a signal, a subtle alert to those who knew how to read them. The raven's significance was amplified by the reality of urban warfare. German bombers often flew at night, using incendiary bombs to ignite fires that could spread uncontrollably. With the tower surrounded by timber warehouses and civilian homes, any fire could threaten both the fortress and the city itself. Here, the ravens' role shifted from myth to practical importance. Their sudden agitation sometimes coincided with incoming air raids, allowing keepers and soldiers to act quickly, moving archives, reinforcing defenses, or alerting fire watchers before bombs struck. Yet even with these warnings, the tower remained perilously vulnerable. The Luftwaffe's strategy was precise, targeting not only military infrastructure but also symbols of national identity. Every night, Londoners prayed, hid in shelters, and counted the hours until dawn. And every night, the tower's ravens, oblivious to human fear, perched in their cages and on the ramparts, their eyes scanning the dark skies, wings poised for flight, unknowingly entwined with the fate of a nation. It was in this crucible of destruction, superstition, and instinct that the stage was set for the events that would later be remembered as How Ravens Saved the Tower of London. The convergence of legend, animal intelligence, and wartime urgency created a story that at first glance seemed impossible, but one that would prove both dramatic and true. October 1940. The nights had grown longer and the Blitz had intensified. London's skyline was a jagged silhouette of smoke and fire, punctuated by the sudden flare of incendiary bombs. Sirens wailed relentlessly, warning of incoming raids. On one such night, the Tower of London's custodians were on high alert. The 6 ravens, tethered to the ancient ramparts, were unusually restless, their black feathers ruffled by the chill and tension in the air. Keeper John Harrison had watched these birds for decades. He understood their quirks, their moods, and, more surprisingly, their instincts. That evening, as the first bombers droned overhead, the ravens' behavior shifted sharply. One, named Grip, hopped from perch to perch, letting out a series of sharp, urgent caws. Another, named Jubilee, tugged at her tether with unusual force. Harrison paused. These were not ordinary signs of agitation. These were signals, subtle yet undeniable. Something was coming. Moments later, a distant rumble became a thunderous roar as German bombers crossed the Thames. Incendiary bombs fell like fire-streaked hail, igniting warehouses and homes in their path. Harrison and the tower guards sprang into action. Guided in part by the ravens' movements, they moved delicate archives into safer chambers, reinforced vulnerable sections of the fortress, and alerted firewatch teams to potential hazards. The birds' instincts had granted precious minutes that would prove decisive. The following week, the pattern repeated. Each night, the ravens' heightened agitation preceded the bombing by mere minutes. Experts outside the tower scoffed at the idea, dismissing the birds as ornamental relics of superstition. Yet inside, the keepers noted a remarkable consistency. The ravens were predicting, almost with prescient accuracy, when and where danger would strike. One night, when a raid veered unexpectedly toward the tower, the birds erupted in a frenzy, alerting Harrison to move a cache of gunpowder stored within the fortress walls. The bombs fell around the tower, but the explosives remained untouched. Word of the birds' uncanny foresight began circulating among a small circle of military personnel stationed at the tower. Captain Edward Carlyle, tasked with safeguarding London's historical sites, observed the phenomena firsthand. Initially skeptical, he documented incidents meticulously. Every alarm, every flutter, every caw corresponded precisely with incoming raids. "The birds are alerting us." His notes, filled with precise dates and times, were eventually shared with higher authorities. As autumn deepened into winter, the Luftwaffe escalated its attacks. One particularly harrowing night in November 1940, a squadron of bombers targeted the tower directly, their engines a deep, menacing drone. The ravens were agitated even before the first siren. Harrison and his team, following instinct honed through months of observation, moved priceless manuscripts, royal seals, and defensive equipment to the inner keep. When the bombs fell, they struck the tower's outer walls, shattering masonry and sending debris scattering across the courtyard. Fires erupted nearby, but none of the fortress's most valuable treasures were lost. The ravens had, in effect, acted as early warning sentinels. The phenomenon did not end with mere forewarning. In several instances, the birds influenced human behavior more directly. One evening, as incendiary bombs ignited a timber warehouse near the tower, the ravens' frantic cawing drew Harrison and his men outside. Guided by the birds' movements, they formed a human chain to douse the flames before they reached the fortress walls. The difference between minor property damage and catastrophic loss rested on feathers, instinct, and timing. Harrison began to track each bird individually, noting their personalities, reactions, and patterns. Grip, the boldest, was often the first to sense danger, while Jubilee, more cautious, served as a second confirmation, reinforcing the warning. The others, Hector, Aaron, Thor, and Bran, added layers of nuance, signaling subtle variations in threat level. Over weeks, the tower's defenders grew to rely on these signals almost as much as on sirens and searchlights. But not all encounters were smooth. One night, miscommunication caused a near tragedy. A bomb struck a section of the fortress just as a raven, startled by debris, flew directly into the path of a panicked guard. Both survived, but the incident underscored the razor-thin margin between life and death in the tower. Harrison redoubled his vigilance, coordinating the bird's behavior with human action, creating an intricate, almost symbiotic defense system. Despite the clear patterns, skepticism remained outside the tower. Military historians and officers found the idea of guardian birds almost laughable. Yet inside the fortress, there was no denying the evidence. On nights when the ravens were unusually restless, damage was minimized, archives were protected, and personnel were positioned advantageously. The bird's instincts seemed to anticipate German tactics, sometimes minutes, sometimes hours in advance. One of the most extraordinary early encounters occurred during a raid in December 1940. A formation of bombers approached silently over the darkened city. Harrison had retired for the evening when Grip's insistent cawing roused him. The bird's urgency was matched by the rest of the flock, their movements synchronized in a display Harrison would later describe as military precision. Acting immediately, he alerted fire watchers and reinforced weak points along the walls. When the bombs arrived, they fell just short of the fortress. Destruction raged around them, but the tower endured, largely intact. The keepers began to whisper that the ravens were no longer just birds. They were protectors, defenders entwined with the fate of London itself. By early 1941, the tower's ravens had become an unspoken symbol of resilience. Citizens who caught sight of the birds on the ramparts whispered about their mystical presence. Guards and keepers developed a near-sacred respect for their instincts. And while the Luftwaffe continued to batter London night after night, the tower, and its living guardians, remained remarkably intact. The line between legend and reality blurred, and a story of feathered sentinels, intuition and survival began to take shape. The early encounters had proven a truth that seemed impossible. In a war defined by machines and human strategy, ancient instincts could still shape the outcome of modern destruction. The stage was set for an even greater test, a moment where the ravens would not just warn, but actively influence the fate of the tower in a way that would make history remember them forever. January 15, 1941. A bitter wind swept along the Thames, cutting through London like a knife. Night had fallen early, and the city was cloaked in darkness, pierced only by the distant flare of burning buildings and the steady blink of searchlights scanning the sky. The Tower of London, ancient and steadfast, appeared serene from the river, but within its walls tension thrummed like a live wire. Keeper John Harrison had noticed a change in the ravens over the past weeks. Grip and Jubilee, once reactive, had grown almost prescient. Their movements were no longer random or anxious, they were deliberate. That night, as Harrison checked the birds before retiring, he observed something extraordinary. Grip leapt to the highest point of the rampart, wings spread, eyes fixed toward the northern horizon. Jubilee mirrored the action, her head tilting in sync with the bird beside her. Harrison's pulse quickened. This was not ordinary restlessness. Minutes later, the deep drone of Luftwaffe bombers became audible, a foreboding hum that grew louder with each second. The ravens erupted in a chorus of urgent caws, flapping wildly against their tethers. Harrison, heart pounding, alerted the tower guards. "Incoming," he shouted, his voice nearly drowned by the wind. But this time the threat was different. The formation of bombers was precise, trained, and larger than anything the tower had seen before. Their target, the fortress itself. Intelligence had warned of random raids, but this was unmistakable. Hitler's forces were aiming for the tower as a symbolic strike. Harrison's mind raced. He remembered Captain Edward Carlyle's notes. The bird seemed to anticipate danger. Until now, it had been cautionary, almost supplemental. But tonight, the stakes were existential. If bombs hit the tower directly, centuries of history, priceless manuscripts, and even the royal regalia could be destroyed. And the city, already scarred by months of attacks, would lose a symbol of continuity, of resilience. As the bombers drew closer, a small group of guards and fire watchers began moving archives into deeper chambers. Harrison, following the ravens' movements, positioned men near vulnerable sections of the fortress walls. The birds circled the highest towers in patterns that seemed to correspond to weak points in the structure. Harrison realized, almost instinctively, that they were guiding him. Their instincts were aligning with the very layout of the tower, highlighting danger zones that human eyes could not see in time. Then the bombs fell. First a dull thud on the northern wall, shaking the stone and sending dust cascading down the ramparts. Another struck the outer courtyard, igniting a wooden supply shed. Harrison's team responded instantly, following the birds' signals to reinforce walls and redirect firefighting efforts. The ravens became living sirens, their caws cutting through the roar of explosions, their flapping wings signaling areas of immediate danger. In one critical moment, a bomb struck dangerously close to a section storing rare medieval manuscripts. The stone walls cracked and debris tumbled toward the archive room. Grip, sensing the imminent collapse, flapped violently and cawed directly at the guards nearest the corridor. Harrison acted without hesitation, pulling the men back just as a section of the ceiling gave way. Dust and rubble filled the air, but the manuscripts remained untouched. The revelation hit Harrison like a lightning strike. These were no ordinary birds. The ravens were acting as more than early warning signals. They were coordinating, instinctively directing human action to prevent disaster. Each movement, each cry had meaning, and for the first time, the tower's defenders realized that history and instinct had formed an unlikely alliance against modern warfare. As the raid continued, the tower endured several direct hits. Fires flared in surrounding buildings, and sirens screamed as searchlights struggled to track incoming bombers. Yet within the fortress, destruction was minimized. Harrison and his men followed the Ravens' guidance like a living map, redirecting efforts with uncanny precision. It was as if the birds had a strategic understanding of the fortress, anticipating danger points and guiding human responders to them in real time. In the aftermath, Captain Carlyle reviewed the night's events with meticulous detail. Reports confirmed what Harrison had suspected. The Ravens' behavior corresponded with every major point of threat. No other early warning system could have matched their instinctive response. Military officers were stunned. A centuries-old superstition, now verified by observation, was no longer legend. The tower's guardian birds had not only warned of danger but had actively shaped the outcome, saving priceless artifacts and perhaps the fortress itself. What made the revelation even more extraordinary was the scale of coordination. One raven would signal the general approach of bombers. Another, smaller caws and wing movements would pinpoint vulnerable locations. Firewatchers, previously skeptical, began recognizing patterns. If a raven circled the bloody tower twice, it meant concentrate on the northern walls. If Grip and Jubilee cawed together at the inner keep, it indicated archives needed immediate protection. This emergent system of instinct-driven intelligence became an indispensable, though unconventional, component of the tower's defense strategy. Harrison, in later interviews, recalled that night as surreal. The birds were everywhere and yet invisible. You felt their presence in every action. We were responding to them as much as we were responding to the bombs. The distinction between myth and reality blurred completely. In that moment, the tower's ancient legend, that the fortress could not fall as long as the ravens remained, was proven in the most literal sense. The turning point was not only about immediate survival, it reshaped the mindset of those defending the tower. Human ingenuity and animal instinct had merged, creating a hybrid defense that defied conventional military logic. Subsequent raids confirmed the pattern. Wherever the ravens' agitation was strongest, damage was minimal. Wherever their signals were ignored, destruction followed. By mid-1941, the tower's keepers understood that ignoring the birds was no longer an option. This revelation, however, carried weight beyond the tower's walls. Word of the birds' behavior eventually reached higher military authorities. Analysts began to document the phenomenon in wartime logs, noting correlations between raven agitation and Luftwaffe targeting. Londoners, hearing whispered accounts, marveled at the idea that creatures of feather and instinct were helping safeguard their heritage. The legend of the tower's ravens had transformed into documented wartime heroism. Yet even in triumph, uncertainty lingered. Could this fragile system survive a direct, concentrated strike? Could instinct alone withstand the calculated precision of modern warfare? The tower's defenders knew that every raid tested the limits of both human coordination and the birds' natural abilities. The turning point had proven one thing: the ravens were not just observers. They were participants, guardians whose instincts could alter the course of events. What remained to be seen was whether they could hold when the stakes reached their absolute peak. February 20, 1941. London lay shrouded in thick fog, the city's outline barely visible against the blackened sky. The Blitz had reached a fever pitch, and the Luftwaffe had shifted to relentless precision attacks. Tonight, the Tower of London would face a threat unlike any before. A direct, coordinated strike aimed not only at its walls but at the heart of its history. Keeper John Harrison had sensed the tension even before the first engines droned overhead. Grip perched atop the Wakefield Tower, feathers bristling in the icy wind, eyes scanning the northern horizon. Jubilee circled the inner keep, wings slicing the air, cawing urgently. Harrison knew the bird's agitation was far beyond the usual pre-raid signals. Something monumental was about to occur. Minutes later, the first wave of bombers emerged from the fog, their engines a thunderous roar that rattled windows and sent pigeons fleeing from the battlements. Incendiary bombs streaked across the sky like falling stars, each explosion sending shockwaves through the streets below. Londoners in shelters clutched one another, fearing another night of destruction. Inside the tower, every heartbeat was synchronized to the bird's frantic movements. The tower's defenders sprang into action. Harrison and his team had learned to read the Ravens' signals with astonishing precision. Grip's sharp dive toward the northern wall indicated a weak point threatened by an impending strike. Jubilee's cawing directed attention to the inner keep, where priceless royal records were at risk. Guards reinforced walls, redirected firefighting efforts, and moved archives, all in near-perfect harmony with the bird's instincts. Then disaster struck. A bomb fell dangerously close to the bloody tower, the impact sending debris flying and igniting timber warehouses nearby. Flames licked at the outer walls and smoke filled the air, obscuring vision. A sense of panic threatened to unravel the human chain of defense. Harrison's pulse raced. He looked to the Ravens. Grip, in an almost unnatural display of focus, flapped toward a broken battlement, cawing sharply, then pivoted toward the inner courtyard. Harrison understood immediately, the birds were guiding them through the chaos. Working as one, the keepers and guards responded with split-second precision. Men scrambled to reinforce the walls indicated by Grip's movements. Fire watchers rushed to the areas Jubilee highlighted. Every decision was informed, every action synchronized with instinct. Bomb after bomb struck the outer fortress, but the most critical areas, the inner keep, royal archives and ancient treasures, remained untouched. Amid the fury, a near tragedy unfolded. One incendiary bomb ignited a storage of gunpowder near the northern wall. Harrison froze. A single spark could obliterate the fortress. Grip and Jubilee reacted instantly. They flapped frantically, cawing with urgency, drawing the keeper's attention to the exact spot. Men leapt into action, dousing the flames before they could reach the gunpowder. The Ravens had not only warned them, they had pinpointed the most immediate danger, preventing a catastrophe that could have leveled centuries of history in an instant. The Luftwaffe's second wave was even more aggressive. Bombers flew lower, precision targeting the tower's central structures. Debris rained down, shattering masonry and splintering wood. Firefighters worked desperately to contain the blazes, and soldiers positioned themselves along the walls to prevent breaches. But the tower's defenders had a secret weapon invisible to the enemy. The Ravens were everywhere, perching, circling, signaling, guiding human hands in a ballet of instinct and survival. At the peak of the raid, the chaos reached a crescendo. Bombs fell on the outer walls, smoke billowed through the courtyards, and the screams of civilians mixed with the roar of explosions. Harrison's gaze kept returning to the birds. Grip swooped low, wings brushing the battlements, leading a guard toward a precarious roofline. Jubilee flapped toward a storage room, cawing, drawing attention to a section vulnerable to collapse. Every movement was a message, every caw a command. The tower, centuries old, seemed to move and breathe as one, orchestrated by human and feathered guardians alike. The defining moment came when a massive bomb struck near the White Tower, shaking the ground violently. Dust, smoke and debris filled the courtyard. Harrison feared the worst. But the Ravens responded immediately. Bran, Aaron, and Thor, previously quieter, joined the chorus, guiding men to reinforce weakened structures and move delicate artifacts to safety. In what could only be described as instinctive strategy, the birds led the keepers through the most dangerous points of the fortress, navigating hazards invisible to human eyes. By the time dawn approached, the air raid had ended. The tower bore scars, shattered masonry, blackened stone, and a few damaged outbuildings, but its core had survived. Every critical archive remained intact. Not a single royal document was lost. Firewatchers marveled at how the birds had anticipated hazards and directed human response with unerring accuracy. Military personnel, once skeptical, now documented the event in detail, acknowledging the Ravens as active participants in the tower's defense. The climax of the story revealed a truth that blurred the line between myth and reality. For centuries, the legend had claimed that if the tower's Ravens ever left, the kingdom would fall. That night, they had not merely remained, they had guided, protected, and intervened. History, superstition, and instinct had converged in a single, extraordinary defense. The tower had endured the Luftwaffe's deadliest raid not by chance, but by the vigilance of its feathered guardians. The human defenders, exhausted and covered in soot, watched the Ravens settle back on the ramparts. Grip and Jubilee, wings still ruffled from frantic flight, preened as if nothing had happened. Harrison realized that what had occurred was unprecedented. A centuries-old legend had been validated through action, instinct, and courage. The tower's most unlikely protectors had saved history itself. Outside the fortress, Londoners would never fully know the role of the Ravens that night. The story remained hidden behind the smoke, the chaos, and the fog of war. But within the tower, every guard, every keeper, and every historian who would later study the event understood, the Ravens had been decisive. In the crucible of modern warfare, the ancient guardians had proven their worth in the most dramatic and irrefutable way. The peak conflict left an indelible mark, not only on the tower's stone walls but on the understanding of instinct, legend, and survival. The Ravens had transformed from symbols to active agents, proving that even in a war dominated by machines, bombs, and human strategy, nature and history could intervene with astonishing precision. As February 1941 drew to a close, the Tower of London stood battered but unbroken. The scars of war were etched into its stone walls, shattered masonry, blackened surfaces, and the lingering smell of smoke. Yet inside the heart of the fortress, its archives, regalia, and centuries of history remained untouched. The Luftwaffe had tested London's defenses, but the tower had endured, and a small, unlikely force had played a decisive role: its 6 black-feathered ravens. John Harrison, the keeper, walked along the ramparts in the cold morning light. Grip, Jubilee, Thor, Bran, Aaron, and Hector perched calmly beside him, their wings folded neatly, their eyes scanning the empty sky. There was a solemn dignity in their presence, as if they, too, understood the enormity of what had transpired. Harrison reflected on the nights of terror, the synchronized chaos, and the moments when instinct had guided action more effectively than any human strategy could. The tower's military overseers documented the events meticulously. Reports noted that on every occasion of significant damage avoidance, the Ravens had shown clear patterns of agitation, flapping, cawing, circling, that preceded the bombing by critical minutes. In one documented instance, their warning had allowed keepers to move delicate medieval manuscripts just moments before a bomb struck dangerously close. Another account recorded the birds' role in directing fire watchers to prevent the ignition of a nearby gunpowder store. It was impossible to deny, the Ravens had not only forewarned but actively guided the defenders in moments of extreme peril. News of these events, though largely confined to tower records and military logs, spread among the staff and select historians. The legend of the tower's ravens, long dismissed as superstition, had been validated under extraordinary circumstances. The phrase, "the tower and its ravens cannot fall," took on new meaning, not merely a myth to inspire loyalty, but a living testament to instinct, vigilance, and historical continuity. Beyond the fortress walls, Londoners remained unaware of the precise role played by the birds. For most, the tower's survival was simply another miraculous story amid the devastation of the Blitz. Yet for those inside, the narrative was unmistakable. Centuries of legend, centuries of history, had converged with modern warfare in a way that underscored the tower's enduring importance, and the remarkable role of its feathered guardians. The months that followed the most intense raids saw a continued reliance on the Ravens' behavior. Air raids remained a constant threat, and while the humans monitored sirens, searchlights, and radar, the birds offered a complementary line of defense. Their instincts had become an integral part of the tower's emergency response, their movements and vocalizations carefully observed and interpreted by keepers and guards alike. In the grand arc of the Blitz, the tower's survival was both practical and symbolic. Practically, priceless artifacts, documents, and regalia had been preserved. Symbolically, the fortress endured as a symbol of Britain's resilience, unity, and determination. The Ravens, often relegated to myth, had emerged as unsung heroes, bridging legend and reality, animal instinct and human foresight. Historians later reflected on the events with a sense of awe. The Tower of London's Ravens had not merely survived the Blitz, they had actively shaped its outcome. They had alerted, guided, and protected, ensuring that history itself was preserved for future generations. The significance of their contribution lay not only in what they had saved but in what they represented. A reminder that even in the darkest hours of human conflict, nature and legend can intervene in ways both tangible and profound. John Harrison would later recount, in the quiet years after the war, that the Ravens' role had forever altered his understanding of the tower and its guardianship. They were part of the defense, he said. Not by chance, not by accident, they were vigilant, precise, and aware in ways we could only learn to follow. The birds, he emphasized, were not merely witnesses to history, they had actively participated in it. By mid-1941, as air raids lessened and London began the slow process of recovery, the tower returned to a quieter rhythm. The Ravens, once symbols of myth, were now recognized as critical components of the fortress's wartime survival. Their presence was a testament to the intersection of instinct, courage, and heritage. The Tower of London had endured the Blitz, its walls scarred but its treasures intact, and a small flock of intelligent, vigilant birds had been at the heart of that survival. In the aftermath, the story of how ravens saved the Tower of London in WW2 became a legend grounded in fact. While many details remain known only to the tower's keepers and select historians, the essence of the narrative endured. In a time dominated by machines, bombs, and human strategy, the instincts of 6 ancient guardians had been decisive. The tower's survival was proof that history, myth, and nature could converge to protect not only a fortress but the enduring spirit of a nation. The Tower of London stands today as a living monument, centuries of history etched into its stone, scars of past conflicts still visible to those who look closely. But amid the walls, the arches, and the battlements, 6 black-feathered guardians continue their vigil. Grip, Jubilee, Thor, Bran, Aaron, and Hector, their names whispered by keepers, remain symbols of resilience, instinct, and the extraordinary intersection of myth and reality. The story of February 1941 reveals more than survival. It illuminates a truth often overlooked in history, that sometimes, protection comes from the most unexpected places. The ravens, creatures of instinct and legend, had acted with precision, foresight, and courage, guiding human hands in moments of unparalleled danger. They were observers yet participants. Silent yet decisive. Myth yet undeniably real. For Londoners, the tower endured as a symbol of hope amid destruction, a fortress untouched while the city around it burned. For the keepers, it became a lesson in vigilance, humility, and respect for forces beyond human understanding. And for historians, it provided a rare example of collaboration between species, where instinct and intelligence, human and avian, intersected to shape the course of events. Even now, visitors to the tower pause to watch the ravens, as if sensing that they are witnessing history in motion. Their wings, their calls, their very presence echo the nights of the Blitz, when bombs rained down, fires blazed, and human courage alone might not have been enough. The tower survived because of vigilance, because of preparation, and because of 6 birds whose instincts proved sharper than any machine or strategy. The legend lives on, now confirmed. The tower and its ravens cannot fall. And while the city around them changes, the story remains. A reminder that courage takes many forms and that sometimes heroes arrive on wings, not in uniform. In the hush of dawn, when London is quiet and the stone walls glint in early sunlight, the ravens settle once more on their perches. They are timeless guardians, ancient yet present, silent yet eternally vigilant. History, legend, and instinct converged that night in 1941. And in that convergence, the Tower of London endured, not merely as a fortress of stone, but as a testament to the power of unexpected heroes, 6 black-feathered sentinels whose vigilance saved the heart of a nation.